I'm Vivian. I'm 72 years old, widowed, retired. Once a librarian, now just a quiet woman who folds her clothes neatly and makes tea with trembling hands. If you met me in the elevator, you'd probably think I was just another old lady clinging to silence and lavender perfume. But last Thursday, at 6:47 p.m., something inside me snapped. I had just finished reheating a bowl of oatmeal for dinner. Nothing fancy, just something warm, and was about to rinse my teacup when my phone lit up. It was my son, Travis. A video call. Unexpected, but not unusual. He'd left for Palm Springs that morning with Melissa, his wife. "Just a short break," he said. "We'll call once we settle in." I answered. But what came through the screen wasn't meant for me. He didn't realize the call had connected. He didn't know I could hear everything. Melissa's voice was the first to slice through. "So the plan's set, right? We get back Monday, get her signed into that nursing home by Friday. Then Travis, my only son, the boy I nursed through pneumonia and defended when his high school expelled him," he laughed. "Yeah, I mean, she's barely using the penthouse. What's she gonna do with 2,000 square feet and a view? We get her out, sell the place for, what, $980? That's our ticket. Early retirement, baby." I froze. My spoon hung midair. The oatmeal bubbled. My hand began to shake, but I didn't move. I heard Melissa again, colder this time. "Send her to a nursing home. The $980,000 penthouse will be ours." And then the call ended, abruptly, like a knife withdrawn too fast. They never knew I heard it. 3 days later, they returned. Their voices echoed down the hallway, light-hearted, rehearsed. I sat on the couch in silence, the same silence that had wrapped me like a fog since that call. The door rattled, then again, the sound of keys fumbling, locks refusing, footsteps shuffling, confusion, panic. Then, silence. Moments later, Melissa screamed, not in pain, in rage. She'd found the envelope taped to the door. Inside, a letter, just one line, in my handwriting. "This home no longer belongs to betrayal." They collapsed outside the door, tears, curses, disbelief. But I was already gone. And the penthouse? Sold. In full. To someone who never called me burden. Sometimes it's not the loudest cry that breaks you. It's the one you never expected. If you're still with me, stay. Let me tell you the rest. Not just how I lost my son, but how I found myself again. And if you've ever been treated like you were disposable, this story is for you. You are not alone. Comment where you're watching from and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Let's begin. The penthouse felt colder that night, not in temperature, but in spirit, like something sacred had been touched with dirty hands. I lit the old lavender candle Daniel used to tease me about. "One day, you'll burn this place, down with those scented memories," he'd say with a grin, setting down his tea mug on the mahogany side table. The flame flickered gently, casting soft shadows on the white marble walls of the living room. Its light reached the edge of the photo shelf, the black and white portrait of our wedding, framed in brass. There we were, me in lace and nerves, him buttoned up and beaming like he'd just won the world. I stood in front of that photo longer than I usually do. It had been 7 years since he left. A stroke. Quick, cruel. He had just made tea. That same mug still sat in the cabinet. I hadn't used it since. Behind me, the living room couch still held the indent of his reading posture. One cushion sunken more than the others. His book still stacked beside the armrest. Hemingway, Steinbeck, the poetry of Czesław Miłosz. I hadn't had the heart to move them. Maybe I thought, if I didn't touch anything, time would wait. I shuffled into the kitchen. The oatmeal I'd reheated earlier sat untouched on the counter, cold now. The spoon I'd dropped was still on the floor, next to the mat with embroidered lemons Travis made in 2nd grade. My knees ached as I bent down to pick it up. The silence in this penthouse was never heavy before. Daniel used to say, "Silence isn't the absence of sound, Viv. It's the presence of peace." But now silence was a mirror, and it echoed. Every corner of this home held him, and now it held their betrayal too. I walked to the tall glass window, the one facing the city skyline. The 33rd floor gave us a view of Manhattan that used to take our breath away. Now it just made me feel high up, far away, and very, very alone. I pressed my palm to the glass. The world outside moved on, lights blinking, horns honking, lives being lived. And here I was, a woman who once held bedtime stories, science fair projects, anniversary dinners, and emergency room visits, now standing in silence, unwanted by her only son. They wanted to put me in a nursing home. After everything. Daniel and I had saved every dime to buy this place. We'd skipped vacations, driven the same car for 20 years, and shared sweaters in the winter just to afford the down payment. It was our dream. Not because it was fancy, but because it was ours. I remembered the day we signed the deed. Travis was 10. We let him carry the folder into the notary office. He was so proud. Daniel squeezed my hand and whispered, "We did it, Viv. You and me, we built this." And now, Travis. He laughed on the phone, saying it would be their ticket, as if he had built any of it. I walked back to the candle. The wax had almost run out. The scent of lavender filled the room like a memory too strong to ignore. I whispered to the empty chair across from me, "You were right, Daniel. I should have listened better." Then I turned off the lights and let the dark speak. When Travis was 5, he fell off his bike trying to chase the ice cream truck. I heard the crash before the scream, and when I rushed outside, he was already curled on the pavement, knees scraped, palms bleeding, lower lip trembling. He didn't cry right away. He held it in. Always did. Until I knelt beside him. Then he threw his arms around my neck and sobbed into my shoulder over and over. "It hurts, Mommy. It hurts." I carried him inside like he was still a baby, knees knocking against my apron, and sat with him for hours as I cleaned every wound with warm water and patience. I remember thinking then, love is when pain has a place to land. And for years, I believed I was that place, his place. When he had strep throat in 7th grade, he wouldn't let Daniel near him, only me. He'd whisper at night, "Don't go to work tomorrow. Just stay." And I would. I'd lie on the edge of his bed with my hand on his forehead until the fever broke. I would have sold my soul to keep him safe. Maybe, in a way, I did. The day he married Melissa, it rained. Not just a drizzle, a full gray downpour kind of day. We held umbrellas as we walked into the glass chapel by the lake. I had bought a soft blue dress with the last bit of Daniel's life insurance. Something respectful, not flashy. I didn't want to take attention, and I didn't. They placed me at the far end of the banquet table, the seat closest to the kitchen doors. The flower arrangement blocked my view of the dance floor, but I told myself it didn't matter. Travis looked happy. Nervous, yes. He always wrung his hands when he was anxious. But happy. When Melissa walked down the aisle, he smiled in a way I hadn't seen since Daniel passed, and that was enough for me. Even when I ate cold chicken from a chipped plate while Melissa's parents made toasts in the center. Even when Travis never came to my table once, I smiled. Because that's what mothers do when their children finally look at peace. 3 years later, I received a call from him at midnight. His voice cracked the way it used to when he was sick. "Mom, I messed up. Please don't tell Melissa he had lost $28,000 gambling online. It started as a way to cope," he said. "A distraction from work stress. Then it grew, quickly. He begged me for help, not just with the money, but with the shame. I didn't hesitate. I wired the full amount 2 days later, dipped into the CD Daniel, and I opened for emergencies. I told myself this qualified. I never mentioned it to anyone. I told him it was over, it was forgiven, and I trusted him to learn. I thought love meant never bringing up the pain again. I thought I was teaching him grace, but now I wonder if I was teaching him how to take and take and take, and how to expect that I'd always be there to catch him, no matter how hard he crashed. Sometimes I look at myself in the mirror and whisper, did I love him the wrong way? Because the boy who once clung to my blouse with scraped knees had become a man who now plotted my eviction. Melissa always smiled, the kind of smile that never showed teeth, never reached her eyes, a polite, curated expression, just enough to pass as warmth, just enough to disarm. At first, I mistook it for shyness. She was always soft-spoken when she visited, always brought a small bouquet from Trader Joe's or a box of herbal tea for me. "For your joints, Vivian," she'd say, placing the bag gently on the counter like she cared. I tried to welcome her. I truly did. I complimented her hair, asked about her work, even offered her the vintage brooch Daniel once gifted me, thinking it might help bridge the awkward silence between us. She accepted it with that same soft smile. "Thank you," she said, then never wore it again. But I told myself, give her time. She's different, that's all. Then Travis lost his job. The startup he'd been at folded during the pandemic, and one morning he called me sounding hollow, uncertain. I rushed over with soup and groceries, hoping to lift his spirits. He was quiet, grateful. But Melissa stood by the sink, arms crossed, her voice low and clipped. "We need a plan. We can't afford your mother's emotional rescue missions right now." She said it like I wasn't even in the room, like I was some old habit Travis needed to break. That night, I noticed something. When Travis reached for the wine bottle, she gave him a look, a quick, sharp flick of the eyes, and he put it down without a word. That was the first time I realized who held the reins in that house. It wasn't the husband. It wasn't the shared decisions. It was Melissa. Every budget, every schedule, every conversation had her fingerprints all over them, carefully, invisibly. I remembered back to the night Travis called me about his gambling debt, his voice frantic, his breath uneven. At the time, I assumed she didn't know. But now, I wonder. A few weeks after I sent him the money, Melissa invited me to brunch, just us two. It was unusual. She never asked to meet alone before. We sat at a quiet cafe near the waterfront. She ordered an oat milk latte and a kale salad. I chose tea. Halfway through the meal, she reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. "I've been thinking," she said, smiling that same small smile. "It might be time we looked into retirement plans for you. Something more. Manageable." I stared at her. "I have a home," I replied. "I'm quite capable." She nodded, tilting her head like a therapist might. Of course. But just imagine, a space where you don't have to cook or clean, everything taken care of, more peaceful." That was the moment I knew. She wasn't offering peace. She was offering exile. A few days later, I overheard her on the phone when I came by to drop off some baked goods. She thought I was still in the elevator. No, she doesn't suspect anything. And yes, he handled the money thing. She bailed him out, of course. Just like we knew she would, I stood frozen in the hallway, fingers tightening around the paper bag of muffins. They had planned it. Used his debt as leverage. Used my love as a resource. I don't know how long I stood there. When she opened the door, she greeted me with a bright smile. "Vivian, you didn't have to bake. How thoughtful." Her tone didn't falter once. That was when I saw her clearly for the first time. Not the polite daughter-in-law, not the gentle voice, but the strategist, the woman who knew how to wait, how to push, how to win. I handed her the bag, said nothing, and smiled back. Two could play polite, but only one of us still had a key to the penthouse. I hadn't opened the bottom drawer of Daniel's old desk in over 5 years. It was one of those heavy, groaning compartments, the kind that stuck halfway and needed a little hip shove to come loose. The scent of cedar and thyme wafted up as I pulled it open. Inside, folders sat like tombstones, neat but yellowing, each labeled in his careful block letters. I braced myself and started digging. The first few files were mundane: pension documents, old insurance papers, receipts for things long gone. But then came the thicker envelopes. Letters from the IRS overdue notices, Travis's name printed in bold. I knew what they were before I even opened them. I had seen too many like them over the years. One envelope still had the faint stain of coffee on the edge, from the night I stayed up late figuring out how to wire him money to cover a bounced check. I remembered the taste of metallic worry in my mouth, the silence of a house that once held laughter now echoing with spreadsheets and bank statements. I flipped through one file, a $9,700 loan I took from my own 401k to cover the damage he'd caused at a casino in Nevada. Another, a pawn ticket for Daniel's watch, the one I'd promised never to part with. It was still at the shop. I never reclaimed it. I kept going. Legal letters, payment plans, phone call logs. I'd written everything down like a good soldier in a losing war. Each document felt like a needle, pricking through skin, long numbed. And still, I never told him. Never once confronted Travis. I told myself I was protecting him from shame, from Melissa's judgment, from the world. But in that moment, looking at the paper mountain of my silence, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to feel until now. Rage. Not the kind that screams or slams doors. No, this was quieter, heavier, more sacred. It came from my bones. Because as I sat on the carpet, surrounded by proof of my sacrifices, Melissa's voice from that call echoed again in my ears. Send her to a nursing home. The $980,000 penthouse will be ours. Not his. Ours. Like I was already gone. Like I was nothing but a placeholder, a burden, an expired asset. I looked around the penthouse. The floors Daniel and I installed ourselves, plank by plank. The glass light fixture we found in an antique shop on our 25th anniversary. The windows that opened to the harbor where we once watched fireworks in silence, fingers gently entwined. This wasn't a property. It was a memory woven into drywall and echo, and they were planning to rip it away from me. I stood slowly, knees aching, heart sharper than it had been in years. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water with hands that no longer trembled. Then I sat back down, pulled the files into one large stack, and tied them with a red string I found in Daniel's drawer. Enough. For years I had believed love meant enduring. That family meant forgiveness on repeat. That motherhood meant giving without question. But that belief had left me empty-handed and half erased. I will not let them take the last thing I have. The sentence came out loud, unexpected, firm. My voice, my decision, finally. I went to my bookshelf and retrieved Daniel's old leather address book. Flipping past faded names and numbers of people long dead or moved away, I found the one I needed. Marcia Keller, Daniel's old law partner. Tough as nails, wicked smart. The kind of woman who never blinked when challenged. He always said, "If I drop dead, call Marcia first, then 911. My fingers hovered over the landline, but I stopped. I looked around once more. Then I nodded, like sealing something within myself. I picked up the phone and dialed. After 2 rings, her voice came through, brisk and clear. Marcia Keller. I took a breath. It's Vivian Lorne. I think it's time we talk about a will I hadn't seen Marcia in over a decade. Not since Daniel's funeral, when she sat in the 3rd row, clutching a white handkerchief and holding her husband's hand in silent grief. She was Daniel's oldest friend, his college roommate turned lawyer turned confidant. And for a time, she was mine too, though our lives had grown apart like branches stretching in different directions. Now I stood outside her office staring at the brass nameplate that read, Marcia L. Green, Estate Law and Elder Affairs, my breath fogging in the crisp morning air. I hadn't made an appointment. I just called and said, "It's Vivian." That was enough. The receptionist ushered me in with a soft smile. The office hadn't changed. Wood-paneled walls, warm lighting, the scent of old books and faint lavender oil. A small photo of her grandkids rested on the far shelf, beside a framed quote that read, "Dignity is quiet strength." Marcia stood as I entered, her salt and pepper bob tucked neatly behind one ear, glasses perched at the tip of her nose. "Vivian," she said, and for a moment her voice was all warmth and memory. Then, seeing my face, she added more carefully, "Sit down. Tell me what's wrong. I didn't know where to begin." So I started with the truth. The call. The words I'd overheard. The silence afterward. I told her everything, down to the lavender candle and the way my knees buckled beneath me. Marcia didn't interrupt. She listened with her full body, leaning forward, hands clasped, eyes steady. When I finished, the room fell quiet, like we were holding something fragile between us. "I need to know if they can take the apartment," I said finally. My voice sounded older than I remembered. She opened a drawer, pulled out a manila folder. "Vivian, you and Daniel bought that penthouse jointly, yes?" "Yes. And after his passing, it was transferred fully to your name." I nodded. "I have the documents." She tapped her pen thoughtfully. "Then you have full legal authority over it. Unless you've signed something, powers of attorney, shared title, anything of that nature, no one can touch it without your consent, not even Travis." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Relief didn't feel like joy. It felt like a rope I could finally let go. "I want to sell it," I said, quietly. "No listing, no signs, no open house this Saturday. Just move it. As fast as you can." She blinked. "That's a major decision, Vivian." "I know. But I've made it. Any particular reason you want to keep it discreet?" I hesitated. "They're away for the weekend. I don't know what kind of timeline they're working with. I just know I need to be ahead of it." She didn't argue. Instead, she stood, crossed the room, and opened a locked cabinet. Inside were files stacked like the bones of long-buried plans. "There's a developer I know. They've been trying to buy into your building for years. Cash buyers. No financing headaches, but you'd have to take slightly below market." I laughed. Soft, bitter. "Let them have it for $980. It was never about the money. She studied me." $980 for a penthouse with that view? That's practically a gift. Not to them. She paused, then scribbled a note. "I'll call the buyer. We'll draw up a short-term sale contract. 7-day close. You'll need to vacate by then. I can pack in 3. And where will you go?" "I have options," I said, though in truth, I only had one. But that was a conversation for another time. She nodded slowly, her pen stilling on the page. Then she looked at me, truly looked. "Vivian," she said carefully, "I've seen you sit through Daniel's illness with more grace than most people could manage. I've seen you raise a child alone while working double shifts and bringing casserole to every school fundraiser. I saw you give Travis everything without ever asking for a thank you." She took off her glasses. Her eyes were gentler now, but her voice was firm. "But this is different. Are you sure?" I didn't answer right away. I stood, walked toward the window. Outside, the city shimmered, skyscrapers gleaming, like glass teeth, taxis buzzing below like impatient hornets. I could almost see the top of our building from here. Daniel once said, "A home is only a home if it protects you." I think that was his way of explaining why we'd saved so long for that apartment. It wasn't just about square footage, it was safety, it was pride, it was permanence. But none of that mattered now. I turned back to Marcia. "Yes," I said, my voice clear, "I'm sure." She nodded once, and with that, the plan began. The morning sunlight spilled into the lobby of the high-rise, catching flecks of dust in the air like confetti that had forgotten to fall. I stood there in my navy coat, clutching my bag tightly, waiting for a stranger who would soon hold the key to my past, and maybe my freedom. He arrived exactly on time, tall, sharply dressed, with the kind of enthusiasm only the young seem to carry without effort. "Vivian? I'm Brian," he said, offering a warm handshake and a business card so pristine it might as well have been ironed. I nodded, silent at first. Then I gestured toward the elevator. "Penthouse," I said. "Top floor." As we ascended, he glanced at his tablet. I looked through the photos online, but I have to say, it's rare to see a unit like this go up for sale, especially in this building. "You've lived here long?" 34 years, I replied. "Daniel and I moved in when Travis was 10. He smiled politely, but I saw it, the flicker of curiosity. Maybe he'd expected someone looking to downsize or move into assisted living, not a widow who just decided to shake the ground beneath her family's feet. When I opened the door, the faint scent of lavender greeted us first. Always lavender. The candles Daniel used to light in the evenings still sat along the kitchen windowsill, though they hadn't been burned in months. Brian stepped inside and froze. "Wow," he said under his breath. He ran his fingers lightly over the polished walnut floors, then walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, taking in the sweeping view of the city below. "This is immaculate. You've taken incredible care of this place." "I tried to keep it as he liked it," I murmured. I watched him take in every corner, the open concept kitchen with granite countertops, the custom bookshelves Daniel had built by hand, the tray ceilings with soft recessed lighting that still glowed like the early days of our marriage. "This," Brian said, pulling out his phone to snap a few pictures, "is going to fly." "Easily. I'd say we could list this at $980,000, maybe even attract an all-cash investor if we move fast. Properties like this don't sit." I nodded, lips barely parting. That's the number I had in mind. His brows lifted slightly, perhaps surprised I already knew, but I didn't elaborate. Instead, I moved to the breakfast nook by the bay window, the one where Daniel used to read the paper each morning while I stirred oatmeal on the stove. That memory sat with me like a shadow. Brian followed, still scanning the apartment. "Can I ask, why now?" His question lingered in the air like fog on a lake. I didn't answer right away. I traced the rim of a porcelain dish that once held lemon candies. My voice, when it came, was calm but firm. Some things, when they break, they don't make a sound, but you still feel it. And you know, it's time he didn't press. Just gave a respectful nod and continued his walkthrough. "I'd like to sell quietly," I added. "No open houses, no signs, just direct listings to investors or serious buyers." Brian looked up from photographing the fireplace. "That's doable." "Discreet listings, private showings only. I'll filter inquiries. And I'd like the closing handled swiftly," I said. "Cash if possible. I'm not interested in dragging this out." He tapped notes into his phone. "Got it. I work with a couple of cash investors who specialize in properties like this. We'll price it right and they'll bite." The weight in my chest loosened a little. Not enough to call it relief, but close. Brian paused near the hallway where the family photos used to hang. I had taken them down the night before. "Do you want to discuss staging?" he asked. "No," I said simply. "This place has seen enough pretending." He chuckled, unsure if I was joking, and then tucked his tablet back into his leather folio. "Understood." "I'll get paperwork to you by tomorrow morning." I walked him to the door. Just before he stepped out, he turned and said, "This apartment has soul. It's rare. Whoever ends up with it, they'll be lucky." I didn't reply. I waited until the door shut, then leaned against it, exhaling slowly. Soul. That's what they were after, wasn't it? Not the walls, not the marble countertops or walk-in closet. They wanted the very soul I had poured into this place, measured in decades of care, grief, hope, and memory. But not anymore. This time, I wasn't giving it away. I signed the final document at 3:14 p.m. on a Wednesday. The tip of my pen trembled slightly, not from doubt, but from the weight of finality. It was done. Marcia slid the papers into a thick folder and tapped it twice, like a silent gavel. "Congratulations," she said. "The funds will clear in 72 hours. Evan's firm moves fast." "Where will the money go?" I asked, even though I knew the answer. "To the 2 trusts we set up last week," she replied. "One for your living expenses, the other, untouched, unnamed for now." Just as you requested, I nodded. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like the quiet breath after a long-held note, a stillness that arrived not from winning, but from finally stepping off a battlefield. Outside her office, the wind tugged at my coat as I waited for the rideshare to take me home, or rather, take me back to the penthouse one last time. I had 72 hours before the keys would change hands. Back inside the apartment, the sunlight streamed through the high windows like it always had. But now it cast long shadows on the floor, revealing corners I had ignored for too long. Dust where Daniel's shoes once stood. A faint impression on the arm of his reading chair. The ghost of a life that had once been full. I opened the closet slowly. It was strange, choosing what to take when leaving behind almost everything. I began with the obvious, our wedding photo, the one where Daniel was laughing with his eyes nearly closed, and I was clutching the hem of my dress so it wouldn't get caught in the wind. Then came the lavender vase, small and round with tiny hairline cracks along its base. It had sat on our dining table for years, holding nothing but memory. Lastly, I reached into the old wooden drawer by the bedside. Inside was a letter. I hadn't meant to read it again, but my fingers unfolded the creased edges instinctively. Daniel's handwriting, always a bit slanted, greeted me like an old friend. "If you're reading this, then I'm probably already gone, Vi. And if you're anything like the woman I married, you're standing tall. Even if it feels like you're falling apart inside, this place, it was always yours. I just built it. What you filled it with, that was the real gift. Don't let it be your prison." The words hit harder now than they did the first time. I folded it back, placed it in a silk envelope, and slid it into my purse. Then, methodically, I began packing. Not the way people pack for a trip, with urgency and checklist. This was slower, more deliberate. Each object, a question. Does it carry meaning or merely habit? I left the china. I left the expensive rug Travis used to spill juice on as a child. I left the set of wine glasses Melissa gifted us, still sealed in their box. I took my tea kettle. Not because it was valuable, but because it had boiled water for every quiet morning I survived after Daniel passed. Room by room, the apartment emptied not just of furniture, but of noise, of the echo of footsteps, of birthday dinners, of late-night arguments followed by slow reconciliations. By evening, it felt like a shell, clean, bare, but no longer sacred. I sat on the balcony, watching the city begin to glow beneath a purple dusk. From this height, the world seemed gentler, smaller, like all its cruelty couldn't quite reach me. Somewhere below, a car alarm went off. Someone laughed. Life continued, and I had stopped waiting for permission to live mine. I slept that night on the floor, wrapped in a quilt I'd stitched in the first year of marriage. The apartment echoed with silence, but this time it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. The next morning, I brewed tea in my kettle, poured it into a chipped mug, and sat once more in the breakfast nook where Daniel used to read the paper. I didn't cry. There were no tears left. Only kind of soft resolve. When the phone buzzed, I answered on the first ring. "It's done," Marcia said. "Funds cleared." "Keys handoff tomorrow at 10 a.m., I whispered, "Thank you," and ended the call. Then I wrote the note I'd been drafting in my head for weeks, folded it neatly, and placed it inside a white envelope addressed simply to Travis and Melissa. It would be the last thing I left behind in this place, and when they returned, expecting to use the old keys, they'd find nothing left but a locked door and a truth they could no longer avoid. I woke up with a list in my hand and a plan in my head. By 8 a.m., I was already on the phone with a local storage company, one that had climate-controlled units, 24/7 surveillance, and a no-contact, no-questions policy for advance bookings. I paid for the first month up front and requested the code to Unit 308, tucked in the back corner of Building B. Then I called a moving service, not a flashy one, just a two-man crew with a clean truck and tight schedules. I told them there were boxes to move, no stairs, and no need for heavy furniture assembly. I didn't use Travis's name or Melissa's, just mine. I said it was time to declutter. Their belongings had been boxed neatly months ago after Melissa insisted they renovate the closet space for better flow. At the time, I thought I was being helpful. Now I saw how easy that made it all. Shoes labeled, winter coats in garment bags, a juicer neither of them ever used but couldn't throw away, Travis's golf set, Melissa's curated collection of sustainable handbags. The movers came at noon. I pointed. They carried. No questions. I watched from the kitchen, sipping lukewarm tea as their boxes, 37 in total, vanished one by one. Each cardboard square felt lighter than I expected, like the burden had shifted from my chest to theirs without them even knowing. When the last one was loaded, I handed the movers a tip in cash, along with a printed copy of the storage unit receipt. I told them to leave the key in the manager's lockbox. I wanted no duplicates, no ties. Then I sat at the dining table and pulled out a notepad. The letter took only 15 minutes to write, but I reread it for nearly an hour. Dear Travis and Melissa, your belongings have been moved to a secure facility, Unit 308 at Highland Ridge Storage. 1 month has been prepaid. After that, the contract is in your name. The details and access code are enclosed. Nothing has been discarded, nothing damaged. Everything labeled as you left it. I thought this was the cleanest way. Mom. There was no accusation, no venom, just facts, cold and tidy. I slid the letter into a manila envelope and laid it beside the white one I'd written the night before. 2 envelopes, 2 truths. One for them to read on the doorstep, the other to pick up at the storage office. The apartment looked almost bare now, just my small overnight bag by the front door and the lavender vase on the counter. I wrapped it in Daniel's old scarf and placed it gently into my tote. Before leaving, I opened the second drawer in the hallway cabinet. Inside was a power bank charger, or so it looked. I had bought it online a week earlier under an alias. The camera was hidden inside, motion triggered, Wi-Fi enabled, synced to an app on my phone. I'd tested it twice already, and it worked like a charm. I plugged it into the wall socket near the front hallway. It faced the entry door at a diagonal, covering the main threshold and part of the living room beyond. They wouldn't even notice it. Melissa once mocked me for still using cables when everything's wireless now. That judgment would finally serve me. I stepped back, opened my phone, and refreshed the live feed. Crisp clear, time-stamped, perfect. It wasn't about spying. It wasn't even about catching them in the act. It was about knowing the exact moment their reality would shift, knowing what faces they'd wear when the lock clicked and didn't turn, when the penthouse, their plan, their prize, refused to recognize them. I closed the door softly behind me. No slam, no drama. I took the elevator down alone. Outside, the wind had picked up. It pulled lightly at the collar of my coat, like a whisper saying, "Go, now." I walked past the doorman without looking back. He nodded. "Heading out, miss." "Vivian?" I smiled. "Just tying up a few loose ends." The world didn't stop. No music swelled. No lights flickered. But inside me, something shifted. Not with vengeance. Not even with satisfaction. Just a quiet kind of freedom. And that, I had learned, was the rarest kind. The new apartment wasn't anything like the penthouse. And that was the point. It sat quietly on the second floor of a low-rise building, nestled in a community designed for older adults, though they never used the word elderly. Here people said things like independent living and active neighbors and quiet enjoyment. I didn't need the marble countertops or the skyline view. I needed a place where no one expected anything of me, a place where I wasn't a burden or a fallback plan or a name on someone else's inheritance list. The walls were soft beige. The living room had one large window facing a communal garden. There was a small kitchen, a reading nook, and just enough space for the essentials. I unpacked slowly. I only brought what mattered: Daniel's photo, the lavender vase, 2 mugs, a worn quilt I'd made when Travis was a baby. Everything else I left behind. That first afternoon, I took a walk around the grounds. There was a gravel path lined with camellias and low benches painted in soft green. A woman sat by the edge of the walking path, reading beneath a wide straw hat. She looked up and gave me a gentle smile before returning to her book. No questions, no judgment, just presence. There was a small library near the center, courtyard with wide glass doors and a sign that read, "Quiet Minds Welcome." Inside, I saw rows of large print novels, puzzles, and a tea station that smelled faintly of chamomile. It reminded me of the school libraries I used to volunteer at. Calm, unassuming, sacred. Back at my unit, I met the building manager, Rosa. She was in her 50s, kind eyes, wore orthopedic shoes, and a pink sweatshirt that read, "Kindness Wins." She knocked lightly and peeked in. "Miss?" "Vivian, that's me," I said, stepping aside. "Just wanted to drop off the community welcome packet," she said, handing me a folder. "Weekly events calendar, Wi-Fi code, and emergency numbers. We've got Tai Chi on Tuesdays, garden club on Thursdays, and book circle every second Friday." I smiled. "I might just show up for the garden club." Rosa beamed. "They'd love that. And if you ever need anything, I live on the ground floor, Unit A. Don't hesitate, okay? You're not alone here." There it was, that phrase, "You're not alone here." It caught me off guard, because even though I had spent the last week executing a plan, taking control, setting boundaries, I had done it all alone and I was fine with that. But still, something about being offered presence, without cost or condition, softened something in me I didn't know was still hard. "Thank you," I said genuinely. She nodded, then pointed to the lavender vase now resting on my kitchen counter. "That's lovely," she said. "Smells like peace." I laughed, quietly, but fully. "It does, doesn't it?" After she left, I made a cup of tea and sat by the window. Outside, the sun was beginning to dip, casting soft orange light on the trimmed hedges and the tops of hydrangea bushes. A breeze came through the screen, carrying the scent of soil and something sweet I couldn't quite name. I thought of the Penthouse, how silent it had become, a museum of expectations, and I thought of Travis and Melissa, still somewhere overseas, planning futures that didn't include me as a person, only as an asset. I held no malice. I didn't even feel revenge, just space. Space to think. Space to breathe, space to remember who I was before I became someone's fallback plan. That night, I slept with the window cracked open and a lavender sachet on my pillow, and for the first time in a very, very long while, I didn't dream of being left behind. I dreamed of walking forward. 3 days before their scheduled return flight, my phone rang. The name on the screen lit up like a flicker from an old wound. Melissa. I let it ring twice. Then I answered. "Hi, Mom." Her voice chirped like a songbird, too cheerful, too polished. "Guess where we are?" I leaned back into the recliner by the window, letting the late afternoon sun soak into my hands. "Somewhere expensive, I imagine." She laughed. "Santorini. It's beautiful, but we miss you." "Do you?" I didn't say it aloud. "That's sweet," I replied, calm as still water. "Hope you're both relaxing." "Oh, we are," she said quickly, then shifted tones. "And we were thinking, Travis and I, we want to surprise you when we get back." My fingers curled slightly around the warm ceramic of my tea mug. A surprise? Yes, she purred. We've been talking a lot about family. About how we haven't done enough for you lately. So, we're planning something special. Maybe a dinner. Maybe something even better. That's thoughtful, I said, my tone untouched by sarcasm. But I might have a surprise of my own. There was a pause. Then the smile in her voice strained. Oh? What kind of surprise? I'd rather let you see for yourself. Surprises work best when they're unexpected. I heard fabric rustling on the other end, and then her voice turned sugary again, too quickly. Well, you'll love what we have in store. And by the way, I was thinking, we should talk about rearranging things when we get back. You've done so much for us. Maybe we can do more for you now. I let the silence sit between us. That was her way of testing the waters, probing to see if I still believed in their kindness, if I'd slipped back into being the docile woman who covered their debts and handed over keys. I appreciate that, I said, steady and slow. It's been a year of change. Another pause. She cleared her throat. Travis mentioned, well, he thought you might want help managing bills. You know, the building fees, the taxes. That place can be a lot. There it was. The script. The same one I overheard when Travis forgot to end the call. The setup to justify moving me out. Nicely, of course. Respectfully. For my own good. I can assure you, I said, there's nothing to manage anymore. I've taken care of it. You did? Her composure cracked, just slightly. Yes, I said. I've simplified things. It feels good to travel lighter. She laughed, this time a bit forced. You make it sound like you're going somewhere. Maybe I am, I said. Maybe I already have. There was a click of a lighter on her end. Melissa only smoked when she was nervous. Mom, she said, this time, no more sugary charm. Just direct. Did you do something with the apartment? I let the question hang, then answered with the same tone I'd used to confirm the weather. It's no longer in my name. What? Her voice spiked, and I imagined her standing in a hotel room, jaw clenched, wine glass untouched. I took care of it, I repeated. You sold it? Without talking to Travis? Without talking to us? You didn't talk to me, I said. When you planned to put me in a nursing home, that was a joke. No, it wasn't. I could hear her breathing now, short, clipped. You've made a huge mistake, she hissed. Do you even know what you're doing? That apartment was worth $980,000. I finished for her. Yes, I know. That's exactly what I received. The line went dead quiet. Then more slowly, you had no right. I had every right, I said. It was mine. Her voice dropped to a low simmer. You think this makes you clever? You think you've won something here? I stood and walked to the window, letting the breeze from the garden lift the curtain slightly. No, I said. I don't think in terms of winning or losing anymore. I think in terms of peace, you'll regret this. Maybe. But if I do, at least it will be mine to regret. She didn't speak after that, just the sound of air, then a disconnected tone. I set the phone down and exhaled slowly. Outside, a few kids from a nearby school were walking past, their backpacks bouncing, their laughter sharp and bright in the quiet street. I watched them go until they turned the corner, and then I said to no one in particular, let them believe I'm still the same old mother they once knew. It'll make the ending that much harder to predict. I hadn't stepped foot inside the penthouse since the sale closed. The new owners weren't moving in for another week, and the keys, my copy, still fit the lock. As I turned the handle, a quiet click echoed, and the door gave way. I stepped in, slowly, like crossing the threshold of a chapel that once held prayers and now only held silence. The air still smelled faintly of lavender. That surprised me. I thought it would have faded. Everything looked the same, yet completely changed. No furniture, no framed memories, no books on the shelf or teacups by the window. The walls held the outline of where our wedding photo once hung, its ghost shape still slightly darker than the rest of the paint. I walked across the hardwood floor, every footstep sounding louder than it used to. Maybe because there was no laughter anymore, no television hum, no Daniel humming as he watered the balcony plants. Only me. Just me. I placed my bag gently on the counter, then pulled out the small white envelope. I had written the letter by hand the night before, folded it with care, sealed it without tears. On the front, in blue ink, it said, "Travis and Melissa." I walked to the entryway and pressed it gently against the glass pane of the door. A small square of double-sided tape held it perfectly centered at eye level. I stepped back to inspect it. Clean, clear, unmistakable. Then I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the charger. It looked just like any other USB wall adapter, but inside was a small, motion-activated camera, one Marcia had recommended just in case. I had tested it twice already, worked like a charm, synced to my phone. I plugged it into the outlet behind the side table near the entrance. Angled just right, it captured the door, the hallway, and the moment they'd realize everything had changed. I checked the feed on my phone. A small green dot lit up in the corner, recording. Then I walked toward the balcony, the one Daniel always said made him feel like he was floating above the noise of the world. The city stretched endlessly beneath me. Cars like ants, lights like scattered stars, even in the late afternoon sun. I reached into my bag and pulled out the final item, a small wooden frame. The photo inside was sun-warmed and slightly faded. Daniel in his navy sweater, arms around me on our 30th anniversary. His eyes were crinkled at the corners from smiling. Mine looked younger, braver, even. I placed the frame gently on the floor just inside the balcony door where the sunlight touched it. Then I whispered, "It's done, my love." I stood there for a moment longer, letting the quiet soak into my bones. Everything I had needed to say was now said. Not out loud, but in action, in distance, in absence, in the refusal to be erased. As I turned to leave, I took one last glance around, the space that had once held my family, my grief, my memories, and now my boundary. On the way out, I paused in the hallway and closed the door softly behind me. No slam, no final bang. Just a quiet end, like a page turned deliberately. I pressed the elevator button and waited. In my coat pocket, my phone buzzed. The camera had caught the image of me walking out, a perfect loop, the last step of the old life captured silently. I didn't look back. The alert came in just after 3:12 p.m. Motion detected. Front hallway. I picked up my phone from the table beside my tea and tapped the app. The live feed flickered once and then came into focus. There they were. Melissa, wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat and dragging two overstuffed suitcases behind her, marched toward the door with purpose. Travis followed, slower, looking exhausted, shoulders slumped, duffel bag hanging loosely from one hand. I watched without emotion. Melissa reached into her tote, pulled out her key, and inserted it into the lock. It didn't turn. She twisted harder. Nothing. She bent over, peering into the keyhole like it had somehow changed its mind in her absence. Tried again, then again, faster now. Travis set down his bag, arms crossed, silent. "Did you change the lock before we left?" she asked, already irritated. "No," Travis muttered. "Why would I?" "Then why isn't it working?" She tried again, the metal scraping audibly against the mechanism. I leaned closer to the screen. Her frustration grew, eyebrows pinched. She rang the doorbell, waited, nothing. Then came the pounding. 3 hard knocks, still nothing. Melissa turned toward Travis, her voice sharper now. "Call your mother." "I did," he said flatly. It went to voicemail. "Try again." He took out his phone, tapped, paused, disconnected. Melissa stepped back, hands on hips, scanning the front door. Then she noticed it, the white envelope taped to the center pane. She ripped it off like swatting a fly. I couldn't hear her read it, but I didn't need to. I knew every word. Her eyes darted as she scanned the letter. Then she stopped. Her lips parted. A small sound escaped, part gasp, part laugh, but not from amusement. No, this isn't funny, Travis. He stepped closer. She shoved the letter at him. She sold the apartment. She sold it while we were gone. Travis took the paper, reading slower than her. She says our belongings are in a storage unit. Paid for 1 month, address included, and please don't contact me again unless it's to apologize from the heart. Melissa's face contorted. She can't do this. She can't just... She's our mother, for God's sake. Travis was quiet. Melissa snapped. Say something. He reached into his coat pocket and slowly pulled out a folded slip of paper. The creases were worn. I knew what it was before he even opened it. Another gambling debt. He held it out. Melissa's hands trembled as she took it. Her eyes scanned the numbers. 6,000, she whispered, then louder. 6,000, Travis! After everything! I didn't use the money from the last loan, he mumbled. You kept it all under your name. Because you've proven you can't be trusted with it. I thought I could win it back. That was it. Melissa exploded. You thought. You thought? You gave away your share of this apartment years ago, remember? She kept it only out of guilt. And now we're standing on a doormat like beggars because you couldn't stay away from a roulette table. She was going to send us to a nursing home, Melissa. Melissa laughed bitterly. No, she was going to send you. You think I didn't know about the phone call? I told you to be careful and you didn't even hang up. Travis looked at her, startled. You knew. I knew everything, she screamed. Every time you whispered about what was rightfully yours, I let it go. I backed you. I covered your lies. But now you've cost us everything. He stepped back. Don't pretend you didn't push me. She went silent. Travis looked down at the letter again. You told me to ask her for money. You said we should convince her to move out. You said she was mentally declining, remember? Melissa didn't respond. For the first time, I saw it. Him standing straighter. Her, smaller. The roles had shifted. But none of it mattered now. Not the guilt. Not the blame. Because neither of them had a key that worked anymore. The message came just after dawn. I had just returned from the garden, where I watched a sparrow hop between the lavender bushes. The air smelled like rosemary and dew. In my hand was a ceramic mug, half full with lukewarm tea. I didn't recognize the number, but I didn't need to. My thumb hovered over the screen. The preview showed only the beginning. Mom, please, you have to understand. I pressed down, then slid the message left. Deleted. No hesitation. I set the phone down on the table and stared at it for a long moment, as if it might come alive and demand attention again. It didn't. It just sat there. Black screen reflecting a fragment of my face. Older, maybe, but calm. It had been 2 weeks since I moved into the new apartment. Quiet mornings, friendly nods in the hallway, a woman across from me who crocheted by the window and offered me a blueberry muffin on my first Thursday. I had declined, gently, and she didn't take it personally. No expectations here, just space and peace. The kind of peace I didn't even know I needed until the silence felt healing. I picked up the phone again, opened the settings, tapped power off. The screen faded to black. Final. Still. Then with slow fingers, I opened the second drawer of my writing desk, pulled out a small linen box lined with navy velvet, the kind Daniel once gave me. He always liked wrapping small gifts in elegant boxes, even if it was just a brooch or a card. I placed the phone inside. No ceremony, just a gesture. Before closing the lid, I added the charger, neatly wound. And then, the small key from the old apartment. The one I had used one last time just days ago. Click. The box closed with a muted thud. I slid it into the back of the drawer and shut it. That was all. No speech, no anger, just space between what was and what is. My hands rested on the surface of the desk for a while. I watched a ray of morning light spill through the window and land on the floor, warming a patch of wood. Somewhere down the hallway, someone was watering plants. I could hear the faint sound of water hitting soil. And inside me, for the first time in months, maybe years, no wait, not absence, but relief. Letting go didn't come in a scream. It didn't demand a dramatic exit or a slam door. It came in, a quiet, complete no more. A small, private revolution, and with it, a whisper I didn't say aloud but felt in every cell of my body. Enough. That afternoon, I went for a walk without checking my phone first. Not that it would have mattered. It was still tucked inside the linen box in my drawer, quiet and forgotten, like an old chapter already read too many times. The sky was a soft shade of blue, brushed with threads of cloud. There was a faint breeze carrying the scent of cut grass and something sweet, honeysuckle maybe. The park near my building wasn't grand, no fountains or monuments, just wide paths, clean benches and trees that offered shade without asking anything in return. And it was enough. I passed a couple sitting on a checkered blanket, feeding pieces of peach to each other. Nearby, a boy chased Bubbles, his laughter trailing behind him like ribbon. A small dog trotted past me, pausing only long enough to sniff my shoe before bounding after its owner. I didn't feel invisible. No one looked at me with pity or suspicion. I was just part of the scene, a woman on a walk. Nothing more, nothing less. I stopped by the small tea kiosk near the southern gate. The woman behind the counter, Jeanette, I'd learned, recognized me. "Chamomile again?" she asked with a warm smile. I nodded. "And a dash of honey, if you have it." She handed me the paper cup, and I took a seat on the bench nearby, the wooden slats still warm from the sun. A few minutes later, Edith, the neighbor who lived 2 doors down from me, approached with her own tea. She was wearing her usual wide-brimmed sun hat and floral scarf. Without asking, she joined me. We didn't talk much at first, just sat sipping, watching the world move. Then she said, "You look rested today." I smiled. It feels strange. Not to be needed. Edith tilted her head. Strange good or strange bad? I thought for a moment. Strange. Peaceful. She nodded, eyes crinkling at the corners. "That's how you know it's real." We chuckled. A quiet kind of laugh. The kind that doesn't echo but stays with you like the last line of a poem. We talked about the new flower beds near the community garden, about the book club she wanted to invite me to, about nothing urgent. No manipulation, no guilt dressed up as affection, no games, just conversation, just presence. As we sat, I watched a young family settle into the grass nearby. The father was lifting a toddler onto his shoulders. The mother laid out snacks. There was joy in their smallness, in the way they smiled at each other, unguarded. And to my surprise, I didn't feel envious. I didn't ache for what I used to have or mourn what I no longer did. I just watched and felt glad for them and for myself. Because I wasn't anyone's burden anymore. I wasn't someone waiting on the edge of a call or a question or an apology that would never come. I was here, breathing, healing, starting over, not with fireworks, but with tea and sunlight. Edith stood after a while. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked. I nodded. "I'd like that." She walked off, humming something that sounded like a lullaby from another lifetime. I leaned back on the bench, closed my eyes, and let the warmth touch my face. For the first time in years, there was no ringing in my ears from guilt. No waiting, no keeping score, just silence. And in that silence, freedom. The kitchen was quiet, bathed in a soft golden haze from the late afternoon sun. Light filtered in through the half-drawn curtains, scattering across the laminate floor like a memory refusing to fade. I opened the drawer next to the stove and took out a small notepad, one of those sticky kinds you use to remind yourself to buy milk or pay the electric bill. I stared at the blank square for a moment before uncapping the pen. My handwriting hadn't changed, still neat, still steady. I wrote the words slowly, deliberately, letting each letter settle into its place like it belonged there. My name is Vivian, not someone's burden. I peeled the note from the pad and walked to the fridge. The metal felt cold beneath my fingers as I pressed the sticky corner into place, right above the handle. There it was. Simple. Quiet. But mine. My name. My voice. I took a step back and looked at it. I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I just breathed. And that felt like enough. I opened the small cupboard above the sink. It was where Daniel had kept the wine. Tucked behind 2 dusty coffee mugs was a nearly full bottle of white he'd bought on our last anniversary. The label was half peeled, the cork slightly worn, but I pulled it out like it had been waiting for me. I found 1 glass, the only crystal one I brought with me from the old place, and poured just enough to taste, not enough to dull anything. The first sip was sharp, then smooth, just like him. I carried the glass to the small table near the window and sat down. There, beneath the vase of dried lavender, sat the old photo album I hadn't touched since the move. It still smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. I opened it to the first page. Our wedding. Daniel in a pale gray suit, smiling like he knew something no one else did. And me, my dress simple, my veil slightly crooked, my cheeks hurting from smiling so much. I reached out and touched the glossy surface of the photo with my fingertips. We were so young, so full of plans. Some we'd followed, some we abandoned, but we built a life that, despite everything, had meaning, had weight, had roots. I flipped slowly, page by page. Vacations, holidays, quiet afternoons. A photo of Daniel brushing snow off the windshield, bundled in his ugly brown coat. Another of me asleep on the couch, book still open on my chest. Daniel must have taken it when I wasn't looking. There was one photo I always lingered on. Daniel, holding our newborn son for the first time. Travis, tiny and red-faced, his hand barely able to wrap around his father's finger. I didn't turn the page. I didn't have to. Not every memory needed to be followed. Some were better left exactly where they were. I set the album down and took another sip of wine. It wasn't celebration. It wasn't mourning. It was acknowledgement. I had survived. Not as a victim, not as a shell, but as Vivian, the woman who once built a home, who once gave love and forgiveness, even when it wasn't deserved, who had once been called mother, wife, darling, dear, but was finally ready to just be herself. Outside, the breeze picked up, rustling the leaves in the courtyard below. I could hear someone laughing, maybe that young couple from the 3rd floor. Their voices floated up like music, distant and light. And for once, I didn't wish to be part of it. I was exactly where I needed to be. Later, I'd wash the glass, fold the napkin and turn off the kitchen light. But not yet. For now, I watched the sun inch across the counter, let its warmth kiss my skin, and sat still with the version of me I had almost forgotten existed. Vivian. Not someone's mother, not someone's problem, not a placeholder for someone else's convenience. Just Vivian. And somehow, that was finally enough. The community reading room smelled faintly of old books and bergamot tea. It was one of my favorite scents now, clean, grounding, and just distant enough from anything that reminded me of my old life. There were only a few people there that morning. A man in the corner asleep with a magazine across his chest, someone flipping through a gardening book by the window, and her. She sat in the armchair opposite mine, legs crossed, holding a thin volume of poetry. Her hair was gray, but not dyed or hidden, just brushed back neatly like she didn't have anything to prove. She looked up and smiled when I sat down. "Morning," she said. I returned the smile. "Morning." We sat in silence for a while. She didn't ask my name or where I was from or why I was here. Eventually, she closed her book and set it on her lap. "I never liked poetry until I turned 70, she said casually. "Now I read it like it's gospel." I chuckled. "Funny. I used to think poetry was for people who had too much time. Now I think it's for people who finally understand what time means." Her eyes sparkled. "Exactly." We exchanged names, first names only. Her name was Ruth. She had lived in the building for a year and said she loved the quiet mornings and the fact that no one expected you to be anything but yourself. "I used to work in finance," she said. 30 years of suits, deadlines, and people talking louder to make their point. "And now? Now I make soup. Terrible soup. But it makes my apartment smell like something's happening." That made me laugh harder than I had in weeks. She didn't look surprised, only pleased that she could still make someone laugh without trying too hard. "What about you?" she asked, not with curiosity, but with gentleness. I paused, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I was deciding what part of myself to share. I used to organize things, lives mostly, other people's lives. Her lips quirked. "That sounds exhausting." It was. We sat again in that easy quiet. No questions about family, about children, or about who calls and who doesn't. No need to perform sadness or strength. Just two women with shared silence between them. "You know what I like about getting older?" Ruth said, reaching down to adjust the blanket across her knees. "People finally stop trying to label you." I nodded slowly. "Or if they do, you stop caring." She looked at me and smiled again, softer this time. "I like you," she said. "You have that look." "What look?" "The one people get after surviving something they don't talk about." I felt the words land gently, like leaves falling on still water. I didn't need to explain, and maybe that was the most liberating thing of all. There, in that sunlit corner of a shared room, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not relief, not revenge, but recognition. The simple, quiet kind. We talked for another 20 minutes about books we didn't finish, soup recipes that went sideways, how hard it was to find good slippers. We laughed at the absurdity of tiny things, and neither of us tried to fill in the gaps with history. No mentions of husbands or adult children or who we used to be before we became this. And when Ruth finally stood and tucked her book under her arm, she looked at me like an equal. "Same time next week?" she asked. I nodded. "Absolutely." As she walked away, I realized she had no idea I was someone's mother, that I'd been erased from a family tree I helped grow, that I had once carried, fed, protected, forgiven more than any heart should have to. And yet, I felt seen, more seen than I had in years, not because she knew who I had been, but because she didn't need to. I stayed a little longer, flipping through a worn novel I didn't intend to finish. The sun shifted slightly, warming my hands, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I didn't want to be anywhere else. The morning light poured through the sheer curtains of my small apartment, washing everything in gold. The air was still, warm with the scent of lavender from the tiny pot by the window. Outside, I could hear the gentle rustle of leaves, the distant hum of a lawnmower, and somewhere, someone laughing faintly. I moved slowly, barefoot across the wood floors, watering my small collection of plants. Nothing fancy, just enough green to remind me that things still grow. A peace lily that never quite bloomed, a pothos vine that trailed over the edge of the bookshelf, a jade plant squat and stubborn like me. I set the watering can down and turned on the old radio Daniel used to love. A soft tune filled the space, Nina Simone's voice stretching long and low through the room. It felt like a hug from a memory I no longer feared. Then I sat at my small kitchen table with a warm cup of tea and opened a fresh journal. The pages were stiff, unmarked, patient. For a long time, I just looked at them, unsure of how to begin. And then, slowly, I wrote, "Today, no one is waiting on me. No one is barking orders or keeping score. No one is expecting dinner or explanations or sacrifices. But I'm still here, alive, breathing, free." I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt true. And that, I realized, was everything. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel like a role. I wasn't someone's wife or someone's mother or someone's fallback plan. I wasn't a bridge or a burden or a backup. I was just Vivian. The sun shifted higher, warming the tiles under my feet. I got up and opened the window a little wider. Let the air in. Let the old air out. I thought of Daniel, not with longing, not even with sorrow, but with a kind of full-hearted silence. He had loved me, and I had loved him. That was enough. I thought of Travis, of Melissa, the way they had looked at me like I was furniture they'd outgrown. The silence after my no, the disbelief in Melissa's voice, the way Travis had stood there, dead in his pocket and guilt in his eyes. They hadn't called again, not after the first message, not after the letter, not after the locks changed and the apartment disappeared from under them like a mirage. But I had never blocked their numbers. I just didn't answer. And now, I didn't feel the need to. That part of me had closed quietly, not slammed shut, just finished. I looked around this modest space, the couch I'd picked out myself, the shelf I'd assembled while listening to old jazz, the candle on the side table, vanilla and cedar, warm and soft and mine. There were no luxury finishes, no marble countertops, no ocean view, but for the first time in my life, every single thing in this apartment was something I had chosen, not inherited, not tolerated, not given out of guilt, chosen. On the fridge, I stuck a small piece of paper, the kind of paper people usually use for grocery lists or errands. On it, I had written, "My name is Vivian, not someone's burden." I stared at that note for a long time, then smiled. There are moments in life when everything feels impossibly loud, when betrayal rings in your ears and silence becomes unbearable. But sometimes what saves you is the quiet. Not dramatic revenge, not an apology that never comes, just the stillness and the chance to choose something different. Before I closed the journal, I wrote one more line. I am Vivian, and for the first time in many, many years, I am myself. And that was enough. That morning, with the sun slanting across my floor and the soft hum of music in the background, I realized something important. This story didn't end in fire or fury. It ended in a whisper. But oh, what a powerful whisper it was. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read every one with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today, wherever you are. We hope you carry this story with you, and remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.